For decades, he ruled the night. Millions tuned in. Millions laughed. But behind the curtain, Johnny Carson was a mystery. America's beloved late-night host wasn't just a TV icon, he was a fortress. Even those closest to him admitted, "You never really knew Johnny." But when the door to his private garage finally creaked open, years after his final sign-off, what they found inside left even longtime friends stunned. This wasn't just a garage. It was a time capsule, a shrine, a vault of secrets no camera had ever seen, trophies from forgotten moments, photos never made public, handwritten notes that hinted at a side of Johnny no one ever saw. Some of it heartwarming, some of it haunting. On January 23, 2005, the world said goodbye to a legend. Johnny Carson passed away at 79 after a quiet but painful battle with emphysema. For years, he'd kept his illness private, just like everything else in his life. And even in those final days, with his body failing, his sharp wit never left. Friends remember him as frail, but still Johnny. Still quick, still funny, but when the news broke, it hit hard. The man who'd been a voice in living rooms across America for 30 years was suddenly gone. Tributes flooded the airwaves. Headlines mourned. The world grieved, and then came the whispers. Carson was famously private. Off air, he vanished from the spotlight. No interviews, no appearances, no confessions. So when his estate began sorting through his belongings, rumors exploded. Locked rooms, sealed boxes, personal letters. Maybe even revelations that could change how the world remembered him. One biographer called him an enigma who gave everything on stage and nothing once the lights went out. And that mystery, it only grew stronger. Every room told a story. Awards lined the walls. Candid photos of a younger Carson with stars and strangers. But all eyes kept drifting to one place. The garage. At first glance, just a room. But behind that door, something else entirely. And when it finally opened, everything changed. In 1984, Johnny Carson made a move that said more about him than any interview ever could. He bought a fortress, not just of glass and steel, but of silence. Perched high above the crashing waves of Malibu's Point Dume, Carson's estate wasn't just expensive, it was otherworldly. A $9.5 million escape from the spotlight, built not to be seen but to disappear into, 4 acres of oceanfront paradise. Gardens that whispered, koi ponds that shimmered, orchards heavy with fruit. Birds from distant lands sang in a private aviary. It was less a home and more a sanctuary carved out of the earth and air, and at its heart, a masterpiece. Designed by the famed architect Ed Niles, the main house blurred the lines between indoors and out. Towering walls of glass opened onto the Pacific. A 30-foot glass ceiling soared above an indoor arboretum. Yes, real trees growing inside the house, their branches reaching for the light like something out of a dream. 3 levels, each one holding a piece of the man himself. Upstairs, Carson's personal sanctuary, a primary suite with breathtaking ocean views, walk-in closets and 2 private offices, places where finally he could be alone with his thoughts, or perhaps with his secrets. The main floor was both luxurious and strangely understated, an expansive kitchen, a curated wine cellar, open terraces that melted into the horizon, and a private media room where Johnny could enjoy the spotlight without being in it. Outside, a saltwater pool, a spa, a tennis court, a custom pavilion rumored to be a personal gift from NBC, and sprawling motor courts wide enough to hold dozens of vehicles. But here's the thing. Despite the glass walls and open skies, Johnny Carson himself, always closed, warm on camera, witty to the world. But behind the scenes, he kept people at arm's length. Only a few were ever invited past those gates, even fewer inside the walls, and somewhere within that breathtaking estate was the garage, a place no one talked about. A place even those closest to Carson barely knew existed. But when the doors finally opened, years later, the mystery of Johnny Carson only deepened. Even behind glass doors and open skies, Carson stayed hidden. Those who visited often said the same thing. He was present, but never fully there. And when the estate executors began their solemn work, cataloging every item, Unlocking the past, they found more than awards, more than photos. In quiet corners of the house, back rooms were stacked with boxes labeled only miscellaneous. Some were locked, others sealed with no keys in sight. A few storage areas had been marked strictly off-limits, even to longtime staff. One assistant paused at a door, hand on the handle, unsure what lay beyond. Something about it felt different. He didn't know it yet, but just past that threshold, through the wall of the garage, another door waited. And behind that door, a world Carson never shared. The garage door groaned as it lifted, metal clattering in protest. A sharp beam of sunlight sliced through the dust, catching a gleam of polished chrome. The air was still, heavy, the kind of stillness that settles in a place untouched for years. This wasn't just a garage. It was a secret museum, a time capsule of Johnny Carson's life told not in words but in machines. At the far end, a 1939 Chrysler Royal, weathered, quiet, and deeply personal. It was his father's car, the one in which a young Johnny Carson first learned to drive. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't rare, but it was home. And in a final act of symbolic grace, Carson left it to Jay Leno in his will, like passing the keys from one king of late night to the next. Nearby sat a glinting relic of ambition and failure. A 1981 DeLorean DMC-12, stainless steel, futuristic, unmistakable. Carson hadn't just owned one. He had invested in the dream itself, putting $500,000 into the DeLorean company. It once trapped him inside when its electronics failed, an experience he'd later laugh about on air. But standing silent in this garage, the DeLorean felt like something more, a metaphor for Johnny himself. Closed doors, sealed tight. A man trapped behind glass. And then came the 1988 Mercedes-Benz 560 SX. Pristine white. Leather interiors. Not a spectacle, but elegance refined. He drove it for over a decade. Some whispered it wasn't just a car, that documents had once been stashed in the glove box, papers Carson didn't want leaving the property. Secrets riding shotgun. There was also his 1992 Chevrolet Corvette, his last car. His final drive, a symbol of the winding road coming to an end. Some believe he may have hidden something inside it. A letter, a journal. Thoughts he never dared say out loud. And in the very back, tucked away like a whisper, one final surprise. A 1966 Ghia 450 SS, rare, Italian curves. A collector's dream. Unlike his other cars, this one felt indulgent, sensual, mysterious, like a version of Carson no one ever saw, except maybe in his own mirror. Every car had a story. Every inch of that garage a chapter. And just like Johnny Carson's legacy, it left one final message echoing in the silence. The man who made a nation laugh for 30 years. Still had secrets he never told, but the cars were just the beginning. As the estate team searched deeper into the garage, they began to notice details that didn't quite add up. Boxes labeled only miscellaneous, stacked neatly but untouched. Cabinets locked tight, with no keys anywhere. And then a folder, wedged behind a rusted tool rack, as if someone had tried to hide it, or had simply forgotten it was ever there. An assistant reached for it, hesitating before prying it open. Inside, a single envelope, yellowed by time. The handwriting on the front, undeniable, Johnny's, but the name scrawled on it was unfamiliar. Not a family member, not a known friend, not anyone they'd heard of. The room went still. For decades, Johnny Carson had been called aloof, even by those closest to him. A man of silence, of walls, of unspoken truths. Now here it was, proof. A piece of his private world he'd kept sealed until the end. Hands trembling, they carefully unfolded the paper inside. What they read wasn't just surprising. It was something that could rewrite everything we thought we knew about the king of late night. To millions, Johnny Carson was the face of American television. The comforting presence, the laugh, the voice, but off camera, his world was far more complicated. His life was shaped not just by fame, but by fractured relationships and personal demons that never made it past the stage lights. Johnny Carson married 4 times. Each marriage left its own scar. His first wife was Joan Jody Marill Wolcott. They wed in 1949, long before the fame, the cameras, the desk. They had 3 sons together, Chris, Rick, and Corey. For a time, they seemed like any American family. But Carson's long absences, growing fame, and struggles with alcohol cracked the foundation. By 1963, it was over. Only months later, he married Joanne Copeland, stepping into the peak of his career and the height of his stardom. But fame came with a price. Joanne later described 2 Johnnies, one charming and brilliant, the other dark, distant, and fueled by alcohol. By 1972, their marriage ended in bitterness. That same year, he married again, Joanna Holland. This marriage lasted 13 years, longer than the rest, but it ended just as suddenly. On the night of their anniversary dinner, Joanna handed him divorce papers. Carson was blindsided, a rare moment when the man in control wasn't. Then came Alexis Moss. In 1987, Johnny married for the 4th and final time. Alexis brought something different, a quiet calm, a softness his life had never really known. They stayed together until his death in 2005. But perhaps the most telling part of Johnny's story was his role as a father. Chris, Rick, Corey, his 3 sons saw little of him growing up. Johnny admitted it himself. I wasn't the father I wanted to be. Rick, the middle son, carried the heaviest burden. Battling mental health struggles, he spent years in and out of hospitals. In 1991, Rick was killed in a car accident. He was just 39. Carson, always composed, broke on air when he spoke of his son. Viewers saw the grief in his eyes, but those closest to him wondered, was it just grief or guilt? When they searched his garage, they didn't just find cars. They found letters, boxes of them, notes never sent, thoughts never spoken aloud. Drafts addressed to my boys, written in Johnny's careful, deliberate hand, like he was rehearsing for a moment that never came. One envelope stunned the appraisers. It was delicate, unmarked, unsealed, and inside, something no one expected. Inside that envelope was a letter written not for the public, not for history, but for Rick, his middle son, long gone. The words were raw, unpolished, honest. Johnny wrote of regret, of missed moments, of years lost to silence. He hoped Rick had known, somehow, that he was loved, even when Johnny didn't know how to say it. The polished wit was gone, the charm stripped away. This wasn't the Johnny Carson America remembered. This was just a father, trying to reach his son from the other side of grief. That letter changed everything, because in those fragile pages, they didn't just find emotion. They found a man. Not the king of late night, but a human being, flawed, haunted, and aching beneath the surface. And just when they thought they had uncovered the deepest truths, something else emerged, something no one, even those closest to Carson, had known until now. For all his brilliance on stage, Johnny Carson carried storms within him that never made it to air. Biographers like Bill Zamey and Mike Thomas in Carson the Magnificent describe a man who could light up a room one moment and darken it the next. The trigger? Often it was alcohol. Friends, co-workers, and ex-wives spoke of a pattern. One drink, and the charming host could turn cold, sharp, even cruel. His second wife, Joanne Copeland, once said he was 2 different men. One the world adored, the other a stranger only a few ever saw. His first marriage to Jody Wolcott was marked by passionate highs and explosive lows. Boozy arguments that erupted in public, days of icy silence afterward. Then guilt, regret, and distance. Joanne Copeland lived through the same pattern. Nights that began in laughter would end in slammed doors and quiet tears. Carson's temper didn't explode, it cracked slow and sharp, cutting the people around him before retreating into silence. In 1982, the world got a glimpse of the man behind the curtain. Johnny Carson was arrested for drunk driving near Beverly Hills. The news hit headlines like a thunderclap. America was stunned. The untouchable man, the late-night icon, had a crack in the armor. He pled no contest, paid the fine, and kept going. But for those who knew him best, the consequences were deeper than any tabloid could understand. Every marriage followed the same pattern: glamour, excitement, then the slow unraveling, jealousy, isolation, emotional distance. The man who could connect with millions couldn't seem to stay close to the people who loved him most. His marriage to Joanne. Copeland carried a darker twist. Rumors swirled that she had an affair with football star Frank Gifford. Some said Johnny discovered she had rented a secret apartment for their meetings. And for a man already guarded, already suspicious of loyalty, it shattered something. That betrayal stayed with him. But it wasn't just at home. The pain spilled into his work. Carson's ambition made him a legend, but it also created enemies. His feud with Wayne Newton was infamous. After a business deal involving the Aladdin Hotel in Las Vegas fell apart, Carson mocked Newton on air. Not just once, repeatedly. Newton later said the jokes weren't just humor. They were meant to wound. And they did. And then there was Joan Rivers. She had been more than a guest. She was his trusted fill-in host. A friend, a partner. But when Rivers launched her own late-night show, Carson saw it as betrayal. He never spoke to her again. Not once. Joan was heartbroken. She tried to reach out. He never answered. Because Johnny Carson wasn't just the smiling man behind the desk. He was a man of silence, of lines drawn in stone, of forgiveness never granted. The silence between them lasted until the end. Carson never spoke to Joan Rivers again. Not after the show, not after the press, not even in private. To those who knew him, it was proof of how deep his sense of betrayal ran and how final his silences could be. Because for Johnny Carson, silence wasn't just a habit. It was armor. He didn't speak about his politics. He avoided deep interviews. He rarely mentioned his past. And when asked why, he was blunt. In a Playboy interview, he admitted, "I live my life, especially my personal life, strictly for myself." It was his way of saying, the world can have the entertainer, but the man behind the curtain, he stays here. But even that boundary, between Johnny the icon and Johnny the man, was more deeply guarded than anyone imagined. Biographers later revealed that entire rooms in Carson's home were kept locked, even from staff who'd worked with him for years. There were spaces no one was allowed to enter, secrets no one was meant to uncover, and the walls didn't stop with strangers. Even his children, those closest to him by blood, struggled to break through. His son Rick, plagued by mental illness, was hospitalized during one of his most difficult periods. Carson reportedly never visited. Not once. The world adored Johnny Carson. But the shadows? They were never far from the laughter, and yet the darkest truths weren't always in the headlines or the feuds or the marriages. They were hidden deeper, in places no one had thought to look, in sealed envelopes, in glove compartments, in locked rooms. To truly understand Johnny Carson, you have to start far from the stage. He was born in 1925 in Corning, Iowa, a small town in the middle of the Great Depression. A quiet, shy boy, he found his first escape through magic tricks, performing for neighbors on their front lawns. It was illusion that gave him control, applause that gave him identity. After serving in the Navy during World War II, he found his way into radio. That calm voice, that precise wit, it set him apart. Television was still new, still forming, but Carson could see where it was going. And he knew he belonged there. In the 50s, he hosted Who Do You Trust? A light game show that tested his improvisation night after night. Then came the moment that changed everything. In 1962, he was offered the desk, The Tonight Show. And for the next 30 years, he ruled late night. He was the voice America trusted at the end of each day. The laughter we needed, the pause we craved. His interviews felt effortless. His monologues legendary. His timing? Flawless. He was called the king of late night, and he wore that crown with ease. But behind the scenes, there was no laziness, no luck, just relentless discipline, obsession, control, the kind of perfection that can't be turned off when the cameras stop rolling, And maybe that's what made the mystery of Johnny Carson so lasting, because while the world watched him with open hearts, he lived his life behind locked doors. In 1992, Johnny Carson said goodbye. His final episode drew over 50 million viewers, a staggering number. But it wasn't just ratings. It was something deeper. A farewell from a man who had quietly become part of America's nightly ritual. For 3 decades, we let him into our homes, and for those few minutes each night, the world felt a little lighter. He left the stage with grace, humility, and silence. The awards followed. 6 Emmys, a Peabody, the Television Academy's Governor's Award. In 1993, he was given the Presidential Medal of Freedom, one of the highest honors a civilian can receive. Later, the Kennedy Center would add its prestigious recognition, placing him firmly in the pantheon of American cultural legends. But Johnny's real legacy. You can hear it in the voices that came after him. Jay Leno called him the gold standard. David Letterman called him the best there ever was. Conan O'Brien, Jimmy Fallon, even modern hosts still study his timing, his rhythm, the delicate way he pulled laughter from a room without ever seeming to try. He wasn't just a performer, he was a masterclass. But what the garage revealed added new shades to the portrait. Hidden among the cars and sealed boxes were scripts, never aired. Monologues, scribbled, crossed out, abandoned. Notes where Carson wasn't crafting jokes, but exploring thoughts. Reflections on fame, on isolation, on the price of being beloved by millions and known by almost no one. One folder held a page that simply read, "They love the laugh." But they'll never know the silence it leaves behind. In that garage, among the chrome and the dust, the man behind the curtain was speaking at last. For biographers, these discoveries changed everything. Was Johnny Carson truly the perfectly composed host who guarded his heart behind punchlines? Or was he something more? Someone who lived with doubt, loneliness, and regrets the world was never meant to see. Some argue his greatest act was the mask, that he perfected the art of being untouchable. Others believe the hidden letters, the quiet reflections, show a man who longed to be understood, but could never quite risk being known. In the end, Johnny Carson's story is not just one of laughter. It's one of mystery, of brilliance and brokenness, of a man who gave the world so much, yet kept just enough to remain unknowable. And maybe that's why we still talk about him. Because behind every smile, every joke, every silent pause, there was something more. Something still waiting to be understood. What do you think? Was Carson a genius performer hiding pain behind the curtain? Or a deeply private man who gave us everything he could? Let us know in the comments below. And if this story moved you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. Because sometimes the most powerful stories are the ones hidden in plain sight.